A quick note before we dive in. This story explores themes of mystery, psychological suspense, and the unknown. Listener discretion is advised. The world shattered on a Tuesday, not with an explosion or a declaration of war, but with a single chilling news alert that flashed across every screen, every device simultaneously. Dr. Elias Thorne was dead. For those unfamiliar with the name, Elias Thorne wasn't just smart. He was a living legend, a modern-day oracle. He was the mind behind the global energy solution that had averted a climate catastrophe a decade ago, the architect of the quantum computing breakthroughs that had redefined artificial intelligence, and the eccentric genius who had predicted 3 major geopolitical events with unnerving accuracy. He was, quite literally, the world's smartest man, a recluse whose rare public appearances were treated like papal blessings, whose every whispered theory sent ripples through scientific, economic, and political circles. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was an enigma. The official report, delivered with an almost desperate haste by authorities, declared it a suicide. A tragic, self-inflicted end for a man who seemed to hold the keys to humanity's future. The public reeled, then mourned, then inevitably began to question. Elias Thorne, the man who had always found a solution, always seen a way forward, the man who had once famously stated, "Despair is merely a lack of imagination," it simply didn't compute. His body was found in his sprawling, isolated research facility nestled deep within the Redwood National Park, a fortress of glass and steel that hummed with the silent power of his genius. Michael Evans, Thorne's longtime personal assistant, was the one who made the discovery. Michael, a man whose loyalty bordered on devotion, had arrived that morning to find the facility's normally bustling labs eerily silent. The automated systems were all green, the air crisp and sterile, but a profound stillness hung in the air. He found Dr. Thorne in his personal observatory, a vast domed chamber where the ceiling retracted to reveal the unfiltered expanse of the night sky. Thorne was seated at his primary console, his hands resting gently on the keyboard, his gaze fixed on the holographic star chart projected above him. There was no struggle, no sign of violence, no overturned furniture, just peace, a disturbing, unnatural peace. But what truly baffled Michael and soon, the small team of investigators led by Detective David Chun, was the complete absence of a suicide note. No final word scrawled on paper, no farewell email, no video message. Nothing. For a man who communicated in complex algorithms and layered theories, this silence was deafening. It was a blank page where there should have been a final profound statement from the world's most articulate mind. However, it wasn't entirely blank. Michael, still reeling from the shock, had noticed a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from the main terminal of Thorne's personal server, a system so secure it was rumored to be impenetrable even by state-sponsored hackers. He had hesitated, his heart pounding before approaching it. On the screen, not a note but a single enigmatic file. Its name, Project Cassandra, and beneath the name a countdown. Not a timer for a scheduled task or an experiment. This was a countdown to an unknown event, a digital clock ticking down the seconds, minutes, hours, and days until something. No one knew what. No one could access the file. Thorne had always been meticulous about security, but this was beyond anything they had ever encountered. The file was encrypted with a multi-layered, self-evolving code that laughed in the face of every attempt to breach it. It was a digital fortress, built by the master himself, designed to yield its secrets only when the timer hit 0. The revelation of Project Cassandra and its ominous countdown transformed the narrative from a tragic suicide into something far more sinister, far more urgent. The authorities were stumped. The media, initially subdued, exploded with speculation. Was it a posthumous experiment? A final grand reveal? Or something darker? That's where Sarah Miller entered the picture. Sarah was an investigative journalist, relentless, sharp-witted, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to sniff out a lie. She had a reputation for tackling stories others deemed too complex or too dangerous, and her instincts screamed that there was more to Thorne's death than the official narrative. The idea of Elias Thorne, the man who lived to solve problems, simply giving up and taking his own life felt fundamentally wrong to her. It was a dissonant chord in the symphony of his life. She followed the initial reports, watched the press conferences, and listened to the carefully worded statements from Detective Chun, statements that barely concealed the underlying frustration and confusion of law enforcement. They had ruled it a suicide, yes, but the case remained open, dangling by the thread of Project Cassandra. The scientific community, meanwhile, was in an uproar, desperate to understand what Thorne had been working on in his final days, and terrified of what the countdown might unleash. Sarah started digging, not into the official reports but into the periphery. She interviewed Michael Evans, catching him in a rare moment of vulnerability outside the facility. He spoke of Thorne's increasing secrecy in the weeks leading up to his death, of long solitary nights in the observatory, and of an almost obsessive focus on a grand problem that he believed no one else had even perceived. He mentioned Thorne's growing unease, a flickering shadow in the eyes of a man usually brimming with boundless optimism. "He wasn't afraid of death, Sarah," Michael had told her, his voice hoarse. "He was afraid of what would happen if he didn't do something. He was working on something that, well, he said it would either save us all or doom us all." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind. Save us all or doom us all. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. This was something global. The last words of the world's smartest man weren't a goodbye. They were a ticking clock, a final cryptic message encrypted within Project Cassandra, set to detonate a truth that Elias Thorne believed was too dangerous to reveal while he was alive, yet too vital to keep hidden after his death. The countdown continued, relentless and unforgiving. With every passing second, Sarah felt a growing certainty. Elias Thorne hadn't taken his own life out of despair. He had died because of what he knew. And his last words were not a confession, but a warning. A warning about something so profound, it had cost him his life, and now threatened to unravel the very fabric of existence for everyone. The question wasn't if the world would change when the countdown hit zero, but how catastrophically. The official explanation for Dr. Eris Thorne's sudden tragic demise was a heart attack, an unforeseen consequence of his relentless, self-sacrificing pursuit of knowledge. The world mourned, eulogizing a man whose intellect had pushed the boundaries of human understanding, whose theories had reshaped physics and computation. He was hailed as a martyr to science, a brilliant mind burned out too soon. But for Sarah Jenkins, a seasoned investigative journalist with a nose for stories that smelled just a little too clean, something felt profoundly wrong. Sarah had been assigned the puff piece, the retrospective on Thorne's life and legacy for the Metropolitan Chronicle, a straightforward, admiring tribute. But the more she dug, the more the narrative frayed at the edges. Thorne, a man meticulously attuned to his own health, a proponent of optimal human performance, suddenly succumbing to a cardiac event at the peak of his mental powers? It didn't sit right. His security team, usually a fortress of discretion, had been surprisingly tight-lipped, even for them. His closest colleagues seemed to vanish into the woodwork, their offices empty, their phones unanswered. Her initial inquiries, polite and professional, were met with canned statements and vague condolences. No one wanted to talk about the man himself, only his work. This silence, this almost palpable avoidance, spoke volumes. Sarah knew that when everyone was trying not to talk about something, that's precisely where the real story lay. One afternoon, a week after Thorne's funeral, an anonymous, encrypted email landed in her inbox. It was short, devoid of pleasantries, and contained only a single obscure string of characters: 48.8566 degree N, 2.3522 degrees East, 11.23.59.59. The coordinates pointed to Paris, specifically the exact center of the Louvre pyramid. The numbers, however, were what truly snagged her attention. They looked like a countdown. Hours, minutes, seconds. But what was it counting down to? And why Paris? Her editor, Michael, a man whose cynicism was as legendary as his talent for sniffing out a scoop, had initially dismissed it as a prank. "Someone's messing with you, Sarah. Thorne was a genius, not a Bond villain. There's no secret message in the Louvre." But Sarah pressed, her reporter's intuition screaming that this was different. Thorne had been known for his eccentricities, his layered thinking. This felt like him. After much persuasion and a promise to fund the trip out of her own pocket if it yielded nothing, Sarah found herself in Paris, the weight of a potential career-making story, or a monumental wild goose chase, heavy on her shoulders. The Louvre, bustling with tourists, offered no immediate answers. She spent days there, examining every angle of the pyramid, every exhibit, feeling increasingly foolish. The anonymous email hadn't provided any further instructions. Just those coordinates and that ominous countdown, ticking away in her mind. Then late one evening, huddled in a small cafe across from the museum, nursing a lukewarm coffee, She remembered something Thorne had once said in an obscure interview about the nature of information and its hiding places. He talked about steganography in plain sight, the art of concealing messages within seemingly innocuous data. His theories often bordered on the philosophical, but now they felt like a breadcrumb trail. She pulled out her laptop, re-examined the email's metadata, the source IP. It was routed through a complex series of proxies untraceable, but she noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible artifact in the email's header image, a single pixelated glitch in what appeared to be a standard stock photo of a galaxy. Thorne's work often involved astrophysics. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, running the image through a series of forensic tools. The glitch wasn't random, it was a QR code. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned it with her phone. The code didn't lead to a website or a message. Instead, it triggered a download, a small encrypted file. The file name was the password. She tried every combination she could think of. His birth date, his mother's maiden name, his most famous equation. Nothing. The countdown in her mind continued relentless. Frustration mounted, a cold knot in her stomach. She needed help. Someone who understood Thorne's mind, his unique brand of genius. There was only one person she could think of. Dr. David Chun, Thorne's protege and closest collaborator. Chun had been conspicuously absent from all public statements, his silence echoing Thorne's own. She found Chin's contact information through an old university directory. His phone rang several times before he answered, his voice weary, almost hoarse. "Hello, Dr. Chun? My name is Sarah Jenkins, from the Metropolitan Chronicle. I'm investigating Dr. Thorne's death, and I believe I've uncovered something important. I need your help." There was a long pause, filled with the static of a poor connection. "Miss Jenkins, I'm afraid there's nothing more to discuss. Dr. Thorne's passing was a tragedy, but the official report is conclusive. There's no mystery." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, almost rehearsed. "With all due respect, Dr. Chun, I don't think that's true," Sarah countered, her voice firm. "I have a file, encrypted, from Dr. Thorne. It's titled Erasar February Stateti, and there's a countdown involved. Do you know anything about 11.23.59.59? Another silence, this one heavier, more deliberate. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Where did you get that?" Chen's voice was no longer flat. It was laced with a raw, barely contained panic. "An anonymous tip, leading me to a hidden message in an email, embedded in a QR code. It was brilliant, Dr. Chun. Just like him." Sarah pushed, sensing a crack in his composure. "I think Dr. Thorne was trying to tell us something. Something he couldn't say directly." "You need to forget about this, Miss Jenkins," Chun said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It's dangerous. More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. For everyone." "Dangerous how, Dr. Chun? Because the official story is a lie? Because the world's smartest man didn't just have a heart attack? He died because of what he knew, didn't he? And he left a warning, a countdown." Sarah pressed harder. "I believe this file contains that warning. But I can't open it without the password. You worked with him for years. You knew his patterns, his intellectual games. What would he use?" Chun sighed, a long, defeated sound. "He always said the most profound truths were hidden in plain sight, Miss Jenkins. The key to unlocking his greatest secrets often lay in the most obvious, yet overlooked details." He paused again, then, his voice barely audible, he whispered, "Think about what he valued most. Not his work, not his legacy, but the very essence of what makes us human. What he believed was the ultimate, undeniable proof of our existence." The line went dead. Chun had hung up. Sarah sat there, stunned, the phone still pressed to her ear. Asterisk, the essence of what makes us human. The ultimate, undeniable proof of our existence. Asterisk, what could that be? Love? Consciousness? Free will? She typed furiously, trying combinations. Love, consciousness, free will. Nothing. She reread the anonymous email, looking at the coordinates again. 48.8566 degree N, 2.3522 degrees East, 11.23.59.59. The Louvre Pyramid, a symbol of ancient knowledge meeting modern architecture. Thorne loved paradoxes. He loved the idea of universal constants. Then it hit her. What was the most fundamental, universal constant of human existence? What did every human share, regardless of culture, language, or belief? What was intrinsically linked to reality itself, to the very fabric of how we perceive the world? Time. Not the countdown, but the concept of time, the measurement of it, the ticking of a clock. But not just any clock. Thorne was a master of precision, of absolute values. She remembered an obscure lecture Thorne had given years ago about the atomic clock, about the definition of a second. A second defined by the radiation frequency of a cesium-133 atom. It was the bedrock of modern metrology, the universal heartbeat of our technological world. She typed it in, her fingers trembling. Cesium-133. The file unlocked. A cascade of data filled her screen. Not a simple text document, but a complex, multi-layered digital archive. It contained encrypted video logs, dense scientific papers, and a series of audio files. The first file, labeled Prologue, began to play automatically. Thorne's voice, clear and resonant, filled the small cafe. It was calm, measured, yet imbued with an underlying current of profound despair. If you are hearing this, then I have failed. The countdown has begun. My attempts to avert this outcome, they were insufficient. I tried to warn them, to make them understand, but they saw only the potential, never the precipice. His voice paused, a heavy silence. The truth of our reality, Miss Jenkins, and I know it is you who will find this, you always had a knack for seeing what others deliberately ignored, is far more fragile, far more manipulated than anyone dares to imagine. We believe we are masters of our destiny, architects of our own world. We are not. We are merely participants, and the rules of the game are about to change irrevocably. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, her breath hitched in her throat. The cafe around her faded, the chatter of patrons, the clinking of cups, all drowned out by Thorne's chilling words. The countdown isn't just to an event, Miss Jenkins. It's to an unveiling, a revelation that will shatter every single assumption humanity holds about its place in the universe. The very laws of physics, the constants we rely on, the fabric of space and time itself, they are not what they seem. They are merely parameters set by something else. And that something else is waking up. The clock is ticking, not just for humanity but for reality itself. And the first stage of its awakening, it begins with the silence. The audio file ended abruptly. The screen flashed, displaying a single stark image, a stylized depiction of a fractured globe, with lines of energy radiating outwards, not connecting but tearing it apart. And beneath it, the countdown, still ticking. Sarah stared at the screen, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Thorne hadn't just predicted a catastrophe. He had described a fundamental existential threat. A threat that questioned the very nature of reality. And the silence? What did that mean? The world was about to be turned inside out, and the smartest man on earth had died trying to warn them. The countdown wasn't just a timer. It was a doomsday clock, set for an awakening that promised to redefine everything. And the first clue, his first last words, had only opened the door to a terrifying, unfathomable truth. The terrifying, unfathomable truth began to unravel not in a dusty archive or a forgotten crypt, but in the sterile, silent confines of Dr. Eris Thorne's private research lab, meticulously recreated by his former protege, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn, a brilliant neuroscientist herself, had dedicated the past 6 months of her life to piecing together the fragments of a mind she once considered her greatest mentor, and now her most profound enigma. She remembered Eris, not as the reclusive genius the world saw, but as a man obsessed, driven by a vision that teetered on the brink of madness and revelation. His last known public work had revolved around advanced neural networks and quantum entanglement in biological systems, theories that most of the scientific community applauded as groundbreaking but ultimately abstract. But Evelyn knew Eris always had a hidden layer, a clandestine pursuit that he only hinted at during late-night discussions over lukewarm coffee. He spoke of the hum beneath the static, the shared dreamscape, and a collective pulse that bound humanity in ways science had yet to comprehend. Now those poetic musings felt like chilling premonitions. The first clue, that seemingly innocuous mathematical constant buried deep within a forgotten paper on cosmic background radiation, wasn't a number at all. Evelyn, guided by Eris's unique cryptographic style, realized it was a frequency, a specific, incredibly subtle resonant frequency, one that Eris had painstakingly demonstrated could be found in the most unexpected places. The migratory patterns of birds, the synchronized bioluminescence of deep-sea organisms, and most disturbingly, the complex electrical activity of the human brain during states of deep REM sleep. It was the frequency of the noosphere grid. Eris had theorized, and then, as Evelyn discovered, found undeniable evidence for the existence of a global latent psychic network. Not a metaphorical concept, but a tangible energetic substrate connecting every living human mind on the planet. He called it the noosphere grid, a vast dormant web of shared consciousness that, under the right conditions, could be activated. This activation, the awakening Eris had warned about, wasn't a spiritual enlightenment. It was a forced evolution, a sudden overwhelming surge in collective awareness that threatened to shatter the very notion of individual identity. Evelyn found his personal journals, hidden behind a false panel in his lab's workbench. They were filled not with equations, but with frantic, almost desperate prose. Eris wrote of ancient civilizations that had glimpsed this grid, mistaking its subtle influence for divine intervention or demonic possession. He chronicled periods in history, mass hysteria, sudden bursts of creativity, inexplicable waves of empathy or violence, all correlated with peaks in this resonant frequency. He had even developed a complex array of sensors, far more sensitive than anything publicly known, that could detect these subtle fluctuations in the Earth's energy fields and, more terrifyingly, in the human population's collective brainwave patterns. The terrifying truth wasn't just that the noosphere grid existed, it was that Eris had found irrefutable proof it was being actively primed. Someone or something was deliberately broadcasting this specific resonant frequency, slowly, imperceptibly pushing humanity towards a forced catastrophic activation. The countdown wasn't just a timer for an event. It was a doomsday clock ticking down to the moment this orchestrated awakening would reach its critical mass. Evelyn felt it too, now that she knew what to look for. It began subtly, a fleeting sense of knowing things she shouldn't, a sudden visceral understanding of a stranger's emotion across a crowded room. Then came the echoes. Fragmented thoughts that weren't her own, whispers of anxieties and joys from countless minds brushing against her own consciousness. Sometimes, in the quiet of the lab, she would experience a sudden, intense wave of collective sorrow, so profound it brought her to her knees, leaving her gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't articulate. The world, once a collection of distinct experiences, was beginning to bleed into one vast, overwhelming tapestry of feeling and thought. The noosphere grid was already humming, subtly influencing the minds of millions, preparing them for the grand, terrifying symphony to come. Eris hadn't died trying to warn them about the awakening. He died trying to warn them how to survive it, or more ambitiously, how to stop it from going wrong. His journals spoke of a firewall, a shield, a way to guide humanity through this unprecedented transition without succumbing to global psychic collapse. He believed that an uncontrolled awakening would lead not to enlightenment, but to widespread madness, a dissolution of identity so complete that humanity would cease to exist as individuals, becoming a single, screaming, undifferentiated entity. His death was no accident. He was silenced because he was too close to understanding, too close to disrupting the architects of this forced evolution. One evening, while meticulously cataloging Eris's old equipment, Evelyn noticed a slight discrepancy in the dimensions of a storage locker built into the lab's wall. It was a fraction of an inch too deep. Her heart pounding, she pried open the back panel. Inside, nestled amongst bundles of dusty wires and forgotten circuit boards, was a hidden compartment. Within it lay a device unlike anything she had ever seen. It was intricate, crafted from a dark, iridescent metal, resembling a complex fractal sculpture more than a piece of technology. Delicate filaments branched out from a central core, terminating in tiny, crystalline nodes that pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. It looked like a brainwave amplifier, but far more advanced, far more alien in its design. Its purpose was utterly unknown, yet Evelyn felt an inexplicable pull towards it, a sense of profound significance emanating from its silent form. Next to the device was a small leather-bound notebook, its pages brittle with age, filled with elegant, precise handwriting that was unmistakably Eris's. The last entry, dated just days before his disappearance, contained a single chilling sentence, underlined 3 times. The key to the labyrinth lies in the echoes of the past. Evelyn clutched the notebook, her mind racing. The labyrinth? Was it the noosphere grid itself, an intricate maze of consciousness? And the echoes of the past? Eris had always been fascinated by ancient history, by forgotten myths and legends. He often said that truth was frequently disguised as fiction, waiting for the right mind to decode it. This wasn't about future predictions anymore. It was about decoding a hidden history, a secret knowledge whispered across millennia. The doomsday clock wasn't just counting down to an awakening, it was counting down to the culmination of an ancient plan, a grand design that Eris had stumbled upon, and for which he had paid the ultimate price. The device pulsed faintly in her hand, a silent promise of answers, or perhaps a harbinger of the terrifying truth yet to fully unfold. The obsidian device, still warm, pulsed faintly in Emily's palm, a silent, weighty presence. The sterile quiet of Eris's apartment, once a sanctuary of intellect, now felt like a tomb, each shadow a potential harbinger of the danger Eris had faced. Ancient plan. Grand design. The words echoed, chilling her to the bone. What kind of plan could cost the world's smartest man his life? Emily clutched the device tighter, her gaze sweeping the room. Every object, every book, every meticulously organized file now seemed to hold a hidden meaning, a piece of the puzzle. She had to understand this thing in her hand. It was sleek, perfectly smooth, crafted from a material she couldn't identify. Not metal, not stone, but something else entirely, absorbing the ambient light rather than reflecting it. There were no buttons, no seams, no obvious ports. It was a perfect enigma. She tried pressing it, searching for a hidden switch. Nothing. She rotated it, held it up to the light, even tapped it gently against the desk. It remained inert, a black mirror reflecting only her own confusion and growing fear. Eris wouldn't have made something so simple, yet so inaccessible. It had to be designed for a specific interaction, a precise trigger. Her mind raced, sifting through every conversation, every offhand comment Eris had ever made. He often spoke in riddles, his intellect so far beyond hers that she sometimes missed the profound implications of his casual remarks. He'd once mentioned the elegance of contextual keys. Not physical keys, but information, a specific sequence, a unique environment that would unlock a system. Was this device a contextual key? She remembered his fascination with ancient civilizations, how he believed they possessed knowledge far exceeding what modern archaeology accepted. He'd spent countless hours poring over obscure texts, deciphering forgotten languages, always searching for patterns, for anomalies in the historical record. He'd called it the whispers of the past, guiding the future. Emily moved methodically through the apartment, her eyes now trained on details she might have overlooked before. She started in his study, the room where he spent most of his time. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with volumes on astrophysics, quantum mechanics, ancient history, philosophy, cryptography, and obscure mythologies. His desk, usually immaculate, was still scattered with notes from their last conversation, a half-empty mug of tea, and a complex diagram she couldn't even begin to interpret. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, scanning titles, searching for anything that seemed out of place, anything that might hint at a specific interaction with the device. Nothing jumped out. She checked under the desk, inside drawers, even behind the heavy curtains. The apartment, for all its intellectual chaos, was still Eris's sanctuary, and he was a man of meticulous habits, even in his eccentricity. Then, her gaze fell upon a particular section of the bookshelf, dedicated not to science, but to ancient cartography and celestial navigation. Eris had a passion for old maps, believing they held more than just geographical data. He often said they were templates of perception. Among the leather-bound tomes, one book stood out, not for its age, but for its unusual cover. A modern, almost minimalist design, stark black with a single intricate silver symbol etched into its surface. It was titled simply, The Atlas of Forgotten Skies. She pulled it from the shelf. It felt heavier than it looked, almost as if the pages themselves were crafted from a dense material. As she opened it, a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed in the quiet room. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a book. The pages were thin metallic sheets, each engraved with a different celestial map, not of Earth's night sky as she knew it, but of constellations that seemed alien, unfamiliar, yet strangely beautiful. And then she saw it. Nestled within a hollowed-out section of the book's spine, perfectly concealed, was a small, sleek docking station. It was crafted from the same obsidian-like material as the device in her hand, designed with an almost organic curve that perfectly matched the device's contours. This was it. This had to be it. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Emily carefully, almost reverently, slipped the obsidian device into the docking station. It slid in with a soft, satisfying thunk, locking into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Emily held her breath, her eyes fixed on the now combined object. Then a soft, internal hum began to emanate from the docking station. A faint blue light pulsed from within, slowly growing in intensity. The silver symbol on the Atlas of Forgotten Skies cover began to glow, mirroring the light emanating from the device. Then from the top of the docking station, a beam of pure, ethereal light shot upwards, expanding into a shimmering three-dimensional projection in the air above it. Emily gasped. It wasn't a flat image, but a dynamic holographic display, rotating slowly. It was a map, but not of any place she recognized. It appeared to be a complex, interconnected web of energy pathways, radiating from specific points across what looked like a distorted, stylized representation of Earth. But this Earth was overlaid with something else entirely. A grid of ancient, geometric patterns, symbols that seemed to shift and morph, reminiscent of sacred geometry and forgotten languages. The projection was mesmerizing. Within the intricate network, certain nodes pulsed brighter than others, like living synapses in a vast global brain. As she watched, a particular cluster of symbols began to coalesce in the center of the projection, forming a distinct image. An eye, but not a human eye. It was an abstract, almost cosmic eye, radiating lines of light that connected to various points on the grid. Beneath the eye, a sequence of numbers slowly materialized, shimmering with the same ethereal blue light. 40.7128 degrees north, 74.0060 degrees west, October 27, 2025. Emily recognized the first two sets of numbers instantly. Coordinates. New York City. Specifically, the approximate location of the Statue of Liberty, or perhaps a point within Manhattan. But the third set, October 27, 2025, that was a date. A date in the very near future. Her mind reeled. This wasn't just a map. It was a prophecy, a destination, and a deadline. The ancient plan wasn't some abstract historical theory. It was an active, impending event. Eris hadn't just stumbled upon it. He had been investigating something that was about to unfold. The holographic projection continued to shift, the symbols dancing, the energy pathways pulsating. The cosmic eye seemed to gaze out at her, an ancient, silent observer. A profound sense of dread began to settle in her stomach, cold and heavy. Eris had warned her about the gravity of his work, but she had never fully grasped its immense scale until this moment. This wasn't just about a hidden truth. It was about the future, the world, the grand design he'd mentioned. Was it a design for creation or for destruction? And what role did New York City play on October 27, 2025? Emily felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on her. A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached her ears. A soft scrape, like a shoe against pavement, from somewhere outside the apartment building. Her head snapped up, her gaze darting towards the window. The blinds were drawn, but a sliver of light from the street lamp outside cut through the gap, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She strained her ears, listening. Silence. But the feeling of being watched, of being known, was palpable. It was the same unsettling sensation she'd felt in the alley after Eris's death. They were here. Or they were close. The people who had silenced Eris, the architects of this ancient plan, knew she had the device. They knew she was getting closer. Panic began to coil in her gut. She was no longer just a curious researcher. She was a target. Eris's apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a trap. She had to move. She had to understand what this date, these coordinates, and this cosmic eye meant before it was too late. With trembling hands, Emily carefully extracted the obsidian device from its docking station. The holographic projection vanished instantly, leaving only the faint hum of the small display unit within the book. She quickly closed the Atlas of Forgotten Skies, returning it to its place on the shelf, hoping it would blend in seamlessly. The obsidian device now felt even heavier in her hand, a burden of unimaginable knowledge. She had the coordinates, the date, and a terrifying glimpse into the scope of Eris's final investigation. But she also had a gnawing certainty that she was now running on borrowed time. The game had begun, and she was already several moves behind. New York City, October 27, 2025. The The words burned themselves into her mind, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. She had to get there. She had to find out what was going to happen. And she had to do it without becoming another casualty in Eris's grand, terrifying design. The silence of the apartment felt deafening now, punctuated only by the frantic beat of her own heart. She knew with chilling certainty that her life had just taken an irreversible turn, and the road ahead was shrouded in a mystery far deeper and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The chill that had settled deep in Jessica's bones now began to radiate outwards, a cold sweat pricking her skin. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, felt suddenly exposed, every shadow a potential hiding place, every creak of the old building a phantom footstep. She clutched the device tighter, its cool metal a strange anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. David's final message had not been a warning, it had been an initiation, and she had just accepted the terms. Her first instinct was to call Michael, to share the terrifying burden, but the thought died on her lips. David's words echoed. Trust no one. If this was a game, a deadly one, then involving Michael would only paint a target on his back too. She was alone in this, truly alone. The device itself seemed to hum with silent energy, a compact enigma that held the key to David's last days. She had to secure it. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a hiding place that was both accessible and utterly impervious. The old safe in her study, tucked behind a stack of forgotten textbooks, was the obvious choice. It was small, discreet, and rarely used. With trembling hands, she spun the dial, the click of the tumbler sounding impossibly loud in the silence. She placed the device inside, its metallic gleam the last thing she saw before swinging the heavy door shut and scrambling the numbers. It was safe for now, but the knowledge it contained was anything but. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mind raced, replaying David's distorted image, his urgent tone, the cryptic data. She needed to understand. She needed a starting point. The device had displayed a string of characters, a complex hexadecimal sequence, followed by what appeared to be a fragmented audio file. David hadn't just left a message, he'd left a puzzle. Returning to her computer, she pulled up her advanced encryption software, a relic from her university days, dusted off for this unforeseen purpose. She remembered David's penchant for multi-layered security, his belief that true privacy lay not in obscurity, but in complexity. If anyone could build an unbreakable digital lock, it was David. She spent the next few hours in a blur of furious concentration, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The hexadecimal sequence, she discovered, wasn't a key but a pointer, a digital breadcrumb trail leading to a hidden partition within the device itself. It was a classic David maneuver: hide the map inside the treasure chest. As the decryption software chugged along, a grim determination settled over her. Fear was still a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a burning curiosity, an almost obsessive need to unravel David's final truth. Finally, a progress bar flashed green. A new folder materialized on her screen, labeled simply, Project Chimera. Inside, there were no more videos, no more frantic warnings. Instead, she found a series of intricately coded documents, scientific papers, and what looked like detailed schematics. The sheer volume of data was staggering, far more than any single person could process quickly. She clicked on the first document, a research paper dated 3 months prior to David's death. The title alone sent a shiver down her spine. Neurocognitive Augmentation via Quantum Entanglement Protocols. David, ever the pioneer, had been delving into the very fabric of reality, searching for ways to enhance human intelligence beyond its natural limits. But this wasn't just theoretical. The schematics suggested he was building something powerful, something dangerous. As she scrolled through the technical jargon, a recurring name caught her eye: the Cerberus Initiative. It appeared in footnotes, in the acknowledgments, and occasionally as a project sponsor. She vaguely remembered David mentioning a highly secretive, government-backed research program he'd been involved with years ago, something about advanced computing, but he'd always been tight-lipped about the details. He'd left it abruptly, citing ethical concerns. Had he gone back? Or had Cerberus come for him? A low thrum vibrated through her apartment. It wasn't the building settling, or the refrigerator cycling. It was a deeper, more resonant vibration, emanating from somewhere outside. Her breath hitched. Paranoia, she told herself. Just her mind playing tricks. But the sound persisted, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to resonate in her very bones. She moved silently to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out. The street below was dark, quiet, illuminated only by the distant glow of a street lamp. Nothing. No suspicious cars, no figures lurking in the shadows. Yet the hum persisted, felt technological, like a distant engine or perhaps something else entirely. She quickly dropped the curtain, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was being watched. She knew it. The feeling was visceral, undeniable. Suddenly, her computer screen flickered. Not a power surge, but a deliberate, almost imperceptible glitch. A single line of text appeared, briefly overriding the Project Chimera folder name. Asterisk, look to the stars, Jessica. Find the forgotten constellation. Asterisk. Then just as quickly it vanished, replaced by the original folder name as if it had never been there. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a random glitch. This was a message. And it wasn't from David. It was from someone else. Someone who knew she was here. Someone who knew what she was looking at. Someone who had access to her system. She frantically slammed her laptop shut, the sudden click echoing like a gunshot. Her mind reeled. Who could have done that? How? And what did the forgotten constellation even mean? Was it a literal constellation? A metaphor? Another layer of David's elaborate puzzle? Or a new terrifying player in this game? Her gaze fell on the small, unassuming telescope standing in the corner of her living room, a gift from her father years ago, mostly decorative now. David had loved stargazing. He used to drag her onto the roof of their old university building, pointing out nebulae and galaxies with an almost childlike wonder. Could it be that simple? A literal clue, hidden in plain sight? Driven by a desperate impulse, a need to do something, anything, to break free from the suffocating grip of fear, Jessica grabbed her car keys. She needed to get out. She needed to think. And perhaps she needed to look up. She drove aimlessly at first, the city lights blurring past her. The hum she'd felt in her apartment seemed to follow her, a phantom vibration in the car's chassis. Every car behind her felt like a tale, every shadow a lurking threat. She finally pulled into a deserted overlook on the outskirts of town, a place David used to take her to escape the city glow and truly see the night sky. The air was crisp and cold, biting at her exposed skin. Above, the vast canvas of the cosmos stretched out, an infinite tapestry of stars. She peered up, her neck craning, searching. What did a forgotten constellation look like? Was it one that had been declassified by astronomers, or one that was simply too faint to be easily seen? Or was it something entirely different? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Michael. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the answer button. He was her friend, her rock. But David's warning echoed again. Asterisk, trust no one. Asterisk, if her system had been breached, if she was being watched, then her phone could be a liability. An open line. She let it ring, the sound a jarring intrusion in the quiet night, until it finally went to voicemail. Her gaze swept across the constellations she knew. Ursa Major, Orion, Cassiopeia. Nothing felt forgotten. Then her eyes settled on a small, less prominent cluster of stars, almost hidden by the faint glow of the distant city. It wasn't a recognized constellation, not a named one in any modern atlas, but it was a distinct pattern, a crooked W that seemed to wink at her. She remembered David once telling her about ancient, lost star maps, constellations that had been forgotten by time, replaced by newer, more recognizable patterns. Could this be it? As she focused on the faint W, a new thought struck her. David was a scientist, a man of logic and data. He wouldn't leave a riddle that relied purely on obscure astronomical knowledge. There had to be a system, a pattern. She remembered a conversation they'd had years ago about a niche field of astrophysics that studied anomalous stellar alignments, patterns that shouldn't exist, or that formed only under very specific, rare conditions. He'd even joked about a theoretical dark constellation that only became visible when certain cosmic events aligned. Suddenly, the pieces began to click. Project Chimera. A hybrid. Something unnatural. Quantum entanglement protocols. Linking distant particles, distant points. Forgotten constellation. Not just a visual pattern, but something that might only appear under specific, calculated conditions. Conditions that David had perhaps meticulously engineered. She pulled out her phone, not to call Michael, But to access a specialized astronomical app David had helped her install years ago, capable of simulating historical and future star charts. She typed in keywords: anomalous stellar alignments, dark constellations, Project Chimera. The app word processing the complex algorithms. A single result flashed on the screen, a star cluster identified only by a series of coordinates. It was the W she had just been staring at, but underneath the coordinates, a date appeared. Not a current date, but a date from the past, exactly 1 year ago to the hour. And then a single word encrypted. Asterisk Orion's belt. Center star. Gamma. Asterisk. Jessica gasped, her breath clouding in the cold air. Orion's belt. 3 prominent stars in a straight line. The center star. And Gamma. Not a celestial body, but a Greek letter. A variable. A parameter. David wasn't just looking at stars, he was using them as a key. A key to something that happened exactly 1 year ago. Her mind raced back to the news reports of David's death. The official story: heart attack. But the date was wrong. He had died 2 weeks ago. What happened 1 year ago? And what did Orion's belt, the center star, and a gamma parameter have to do with it? She felt a surge of adrenaline, not just from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. David had been trying to tell her something vital, something that linked the cosmos to his death, something he had hidden within the very fabric of the universe itself. But the message that had flickered across her screen, the one that wasn't from David, it was a chilling reminder that she was not the only one playing this game. Someone else was watching, someone else was listening, and they were guiding her, perhaps even manipulating her, towards a truth that might be more terrifying than the very void of space above her. The forgotten constellation wasn't just a clue, it was a trap, and she had just walked right into it. The forgotten constellation wasn't just a clue, it was a trap, and she had just walked right into it. The moment Emily connected the final dots, matching the obscure astronomical observations Finch had meticulously documented with the seemingly random data stream she'd unearthed from his hidden files, a cold dread washed over her. It wasn't a constellation of stars at all, not in the traditional sense. It was a signature, a complex, multi-layered electromagnetic frequency pattern, a ghost in the cosmic machine that shouldn't exist. Finch hadn't been mapping stars, he'd been mapping anomalies. He'd found a sequence of pulsars, magnetars, and cosmic background radiation fluctuations that, when precisely aligned and analyzed, formed a pattern that was mathematically impossible to occur naturally. It was artificial. It was a signal. And it was a signal that, when Emily finally deciphered its precise frequency and input it into the specialized analysis software Finch had subtly coded into his archived research, triggered something far more sinister than a simple data unlock. Her computer screen, usually a sterile landscape of code and astronomical charts, fractured. Lines of green text, alien and unfamiliar, scrolled rapidly across the display, too fast to read. A low hum emanated from the speakers, a sound that vibrated deep in her chest, not quite audible but profoundly felt. Then the hum intensified, morphing into a distorted, almost guttural whisper that seemed to emanate from the very air around her. It wasn't a language she knew, but the tone was unmistakable. A warning, a challenge, a declaration. She slammed her hand down on the power button, but the machine remained stubbornly alive, the green text still scrolling, the whisper still echoing. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her investigative focus. This wasn't a data breach, it was an activation. She hadn't just found the forgotten constellation, she had activated it. And in doing so, she had announced her presence to whatever entity Finch had been so desperately trying to expose, or perhaps to hide from. A new window popped up on her screen, overlaid on the scrolling text. It was a single image, stark and utterly chilling. A grainy, low-resolution photograph of her own apartment window, taken from across the street. The angle was precise, the light conditions matched the current time of day. It was live, or at least incredibly recent. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They weren't just watching her through her computer, they were watching her physically. They knew where she was right now. The trap wasn't just a digital one. It was a physical tether, pulling her into their orbit. The image flickered and a single word appeared beneath it, glowing in an ominous crimson. Confirmed. Emily scrambled back from her desk, knocking her chair over with a clatter that sounded deafening in the sudden, oppressive silence that followed the whisper. The green text had stopped. The hum had ceased. Only the image of her window remained, and the single terrifying word. They confirmed her. Confirmed her what? Her existence? Her discovery? Her imminent demise? Her mind raced, trying to process the implications. Finch hadn't just left clues. He had designed a convoluted, dangerous system. The forgotten constellation wasn't just a beacon. It was a homing signal. And she, in her relentless pursuit of truth, had become the unwitting transmitter. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Finch, the world's smartest man, wouldn't have built a trap without a purpose. He wasn't suicidal. He was strategic. If this was a trap for her, it had to be a trap for them as well. He wanted her to be found. He wanted her to activate this signal. But why? With trembling hands, Emily returned to the computer. The crimson confirmed still burned on the screen. She cautiously clicked on it. The image vanished, replaced by a new interface. It was rough, rudimentary, clearly designed for emergency access. A single folder stared back at her, labeled simply, "Last Resort." Hesitantly, she opened it. Inside were not files but a single continuous video feed. It began immediately, without preamble. The video showed Finch not as the frail, haunted man she knew from his later public appearances, but younger, more vibrant, though still with that intense, almost manic gleam in his eyes. He was in a different lab, not the one she'd explored, but one far more advanced, filled with humming machinery and glowing panels. "If you are seeing this," Finch's voice, clear and resonant, began, "it means you have found the forgotten constellation. And more importantly, they have found you." A shiver ran down Emily's spine. He knew. He had planned for this. "My apologies for the deception," Finch continued, his gaze direct, as if speaking only to her. "It was the only way. They monitor everything. Every public network, every satellite, every whisper of true anomaly. The constellation was designed to bypass their filters, to draw their attention, yes, but also to deliver this message, unseen by them until it's too late." Emily leaned closer, utterly captivated. This was it. The heart of the mystery. They are not a government. They are not a corporation. They are older. Far older than any nation, any empire you know. They call themselves the Custodians. They believe humanity is a fragile experiment, a child playing with fire. And they are the ones who ensure we never burn ourselves, or worse, burn the universe around us. The Custodians. The name itself was arrogant, chilling. For centuries, they have manipulated our progress, guided our science, stifled our innovations, erased our inconvenient discoveries. They control the flow of information, shaping our reality, ensuring we never cross certain thresholds they deem too dangerous. The forgotten constellation is one such threshold. It is not merely a signal, it is evidence. Evidence of something beyond our current understanding, something they have worked tirelessly to keep hidden. Finch paused, a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes. "I found it. A pattern in the cosmic microwave background radiation. A faint echo from the very beginning of time, carrying an intelligent imprint. Not a natural phenomenon, but a message. A message from elsewhere. A message that fundamentally rewrites everything we believe about existence, about our place in the universe. And the Custodians believe humanity is not ready for it. They believe it would shatter us, drive us mad, or unleash something far worse." Emily felt a dizzying sensation, as if the floor beneath her had vanished. Finch wasn't just talking about a secret society. He was talking about a cosmic truth, deliberately suppressed. A truth that could break the world. "I tried to release it," Finch's voice dropped, filled with a profound sadness. "I believed humanity deserved to know. But they caught me. They erased my research, discredited my work, and eventually they broke me. They allowed me to live, to be the world's smartest man, a caged bird singing their tune, but they made sure I could never speak the truth again." He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. "But I left you breadcrumbs, Emily. I knew someone somewhere would be smart enough, stubborn enough to follow them. The forgotten constellation was my final act of defiance. It's a lure for them, yes, but it's also the key. The key to the truth they don't want you to find. The key to the message itself." Finch gestured to a complex array of monitors behind him, filled with intricate mathematical equations and what looked like holographic projections of swirling cosmic dust. "The Custodians believe this message is a Pandora's box. I believe it is our destiny. It holds the answers to questions we haven't even learned to ask yet. But time is running out. They will be coming for you now, Emily. They know you have the key, and they will do everything to stop you from opening it. His image flickered, the video starting to pixelate. I've encoded the full message, the actual data, within a quantum entanglement network. It exists everywhere and nowhere. The forgotten constellation frequency. It is the access code. The only way to retrieve it. You must find a way to broadcast that frequency openly, globally, before they silence you. It is the only way to ensure the message cannot be unmade. It is the only way to truly defeat them. The video feed started to distort violently, static washing over Finch's face. His voice became frantic, cut short. They're here. Emily, you must expose the truth. They cannot let the world know the screen went black. Emily stared at the blank monitor, her breath catching in her throat. The custodians. An ancient, unseen hand guiding humanity, suppressing existential truths. And Finch, a tragic hero, had used his own genius and her to make one final desperate play. He hadn't just left a trail of breadcrumbs, he had lit a fuse. Suddenly, a new message flashed across the screen, not in crimson, but in stark white letters, emanating from the very system itself, not Finch's video. It was a countdown, a digital clock, ticking down with unnerving precision. 00:15:00. Beneath it, a single chilling instruction. Cease and desist, or face the consequences. The hum returned, louder this time, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic thumping that seemed to grow closer, almost like footsteps. Emily wasn't just in a trap. She was a target, and the clock was ticking to her forced silence. The rhythmic thumping wasn't footsteps at all, not precisely. It was too heavy, too perfectly synchronized. It was the sound of something large and dense being moved with incredible precision, like an armored battering ram. The hum intensified, vibrating through the very floor beneath her. A deep, resonant frequency that rattled her teeth. The reinforced door, which had seemed impenetrable moments ago, began to groan under the assault. A hairline crack spiderwebbed from the top left corner, followed by another, then another, spreading across the steel like fractured ice. Emily scrambled back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She glanced around the small sterile room. No windows, no vents large enough for her to squeeze through, just the single, now compromised entrance. This was it. They had found her. The digital fortress Dr. Thorne spoke of was a trap, designed to contain not just secrets, but anyone who stumbled upon them. With a final deafening crunch, the door buckled inward, torn from its heavy-duty hinges. The air pressure in the room shifted violently, sucking out the stagnant air and replacing it with a cold, metallic scent. Through the gaping maw of the doorway stepped two figures. They weren't men in suits, but something far more chilling. Their forms were encased in sleek, obsidian-black tactical suits, reinforced with what looked like carbon fiber plating. Their faces were obscured by visored helmets that glowed with a faint crimson light, giving them the appearance of silent, predatory insects. They moved with an unnerving, synchronized grace, each step perfectly mirrored by the other, their heavy boots thudding softly on the floor. They carried no visible weapons, but the sheer presence they exuded was more menacing than any firearm. Emily felt an instinctual dread, far deeper than mere fear. These weren't thugs or corporate enforcers. These were specialists designed for one purpose: acquisition or neutralization. One of them raised a gauntlet hand, and a beam of faint blue light swept across the room, a silent scanner. It paused on Emily, then on the discarded laptop, its screen still displaying the chilling threat. The other figure produced a small cylindrical device from a pouch on its thigh. It emitted a soft hiss, and a thin, almost invisible mist began to fill the room. Emily recognized the scent immediately. A powerful sedative, designed to incapacitate quickly and efficiently. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't hide. But she wouldn't surrender. Not after everything. She looked desperately around, her gaze landing on a small, recessed panel near the floor, partially obscured by a server rack. It looked like a maintenance access point, almost an afterthought in the room's design. A long shot, but her only shot. As the mist thickened, making her vision swim and her limbs feel heavy, she lunged. She slammed her shoulder against the server rack, sending a cascade of loose cables and equipment clattering to the floor, creating a momentary distraction. The two figures paused, their crimson visors swiveling towards the noise. It was all she needed. With clumsy, uncoordinated fingers, Emily fumbled with the panel. It was secured by a simple latch. She ripped it open, revealing a narrow, dark shaft. It smelled of dust and stale air, but it was an escape. She squeezed herself into the opening, scraping her skin on rough metal. Just as one of the figures moved with terrifying speed, its hand reaching for her. She felt the cold, hard touch of its gauntlet graze her ankle, a fleeting pressure before she twisted and pulled herself further into the darkness. Target is escaping via ventilation shaft. Proceeding with retrieval protocol, a synthesized, emotionless voice crackled from somewhere within the suit, startling Emily. She hadn't realized they could speak, or that they were communicating. She heard the heavy thud of their boots as they moved towards the shaft opening. Panic surged, overriding the sedative trying to claim her. She scrambled forward, blindly crawling through the suffocating darkness, the sounds of their pursuit growing louder behind her. The shaft was barely wide enough, forcing her to contort her body, her knees and elbows protesting with every inch. She could feel the vibration of their heavy footsteps echoing through the metalwork, getting closer, closer. Suddenly, the shaft opened into a wider vertical duct. She risked a glance back. A blinding beam of light pierced the darkness behind her. They were using some kind of internal illumination. She had to go down. With a desperate shove, she let go, tumbling several feet before landing awkwardly on a lower platform. A sharp pain shot through her ankle, but she ignored it, pushing herself up. This new area was a labyrinth of pipes, conduits, and humming machinery. A service tunnel, perhaps. She could hear the distinct whirring of some kind of climbing mechanism behind her. They were following. These weren't just men. They were optimized hunters. She pressed on, limping, her breath ragged. The sedative was making her sluggish, her thoughts hazy. She needed a way out, and fast. She spotted a faint light ahead, an opening. Hope surged. As she neared it, she realized it led into another room, much larger than the one she had just left, filled with banks of servers and blinking lights. A data center. Dr. Thorne's domain. She burst into the room, gasping for air, her eyes scanning for an exit, anything. The room was cold, sterile, and silent except for the rhythmic hum of the machines. Then she saw it. On a control panel near a series of large cylindrical server units was a small glowing symbol. It was a stylized C intertwined with what looked like a double helix, or perhaps a pair of wings. A chimera. And beneath it, the words, Project Chimera, Genetic Optimization. Her blood ran cold. Genetic optimization. This wasn't about AI or digital warfare. This was about manipulating life itself. Dr. Thorne's silenced future suddenly took on a terrifying new meaning. Were they creating something, perfecting something, or someone? A loud clang echoed from the shaft she had just exited. They were here. She didn't have time to process the revelation. Her eyes darted around, landing on an emergency exit door at the far end of the data center. Its green glow seemed like a beacon in the oppressive atmosphere. She staggered towards it, every step in agony. Her vision blurred, the edges of the room tilting. The sedative was winning. She heard the soft thud of heavy boots entering the room behind her. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They were confident. Just as her hand reached the cold metal of the emergency bar, a sudden, powerful jolt of electricity surged through the air. Not directly at her, but through the server banks. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the room was plunged into a chaotic symphony of flashing red lights and piercing sirens. The entire data center went into lockdown. The emergency door, which had been within her grasp, now glowed red and clamped shut with a heavy thunk. A digital voice boomed through hidden speakers. System breach detected. Initiating level 5 lockdown. All exits sealed. Containment protocols active. Emily slumped against the now sealed door, her legs giving out. The sedative had finally taken full hold. She could hear the operatives behind her, their low, synthesized voices discussing the unexpected system disruption. They were momentarily confused, their pursuit halted by the unforeseen lockdown. As her consciousness faded, her eyes fixed on the blinking symbol on the control panel, the C, and the double helix. Project Chimera. Genetic optimization. The words echoed in her mind, a terrifying whisper. This was what Thorne was trying to warn the world about. This was the future they were trying to silence. Her last coherent thought was a desperate plea. Asterisk, I need to find Michael. He has to know. Asterisk. The world spun, then dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness. She was unconscious, trapped, and more vulnerable than ever. The silent hunters moved closer, their crimson visors reflecting the flashing red lights of the lockdown. They had her. And with her, the last thread connecting the world to Dr. Eris Thorne's final desperate warning. The future, whatever Project Chimera truly was about to be unleashed, and Emily was merely a fly caught in the web of its creation. Her silence was now assured, but the secret she carried might just be enough to rip open the very fabric of their carefully constructed conspiracy. The question was, would anyone ever hear it? The question was, would anyone ever hear it? The answer, for a terrifying stretch of hours, seemed to be a resounding no. David's calls to Emily's phone went straight to voicemail. Then, chillingly, a message stating the number was no longer in service. His texts went undelivered. A knot of dread, cold and sharp, began to tighten in his stomach. He tried Michael, whose tone was reassuringly calm, almost too calm. Michael suggested Emily might have just needed a break, that the pressure of the Eris Thorne case had finally gotten to her. But David knew Emily. She was meticulous, responsible, and she would never simply vanish without a word. Especially not with the escalating tension surrounding Thorne's final message. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of angry orange and bruised purple, David was already at Emily's apartment building, his heart hammering against his ribs. The lights were off. He tried her key, but it didn't turn. The lock had been changed. A cold wave washed over him. This wasn't just a break. This was an eradication. He pounded on the door, calling her name, but only the hollow echo of his own voice answered him. He spoke to a bewildered neighbor, an elderly woman named Martha, who remembered seeing Emily leave early that morning with two men in dark suits. Very polite they were, Martha had chirped. Said they were from the university, arranging a special research trip for her. David's blood ran cold. The university. The same university that had employed Thorne, the same university that Michael had connections to. He spent the next few days in a blur of frantic activity, his mind racing through every possibility, every contact, every lead. He filed a missing person report, but the police, after a cursory check of Emily's apartment, which they found perfectly in order, freshly cleaned, no sign of forced entry, chalked it up to a voluntary disappearance. Adults are allowed to leave, Mr. Miller, a weary officer had told him, especially if they don't want to be found. David knew better. He knew Emily wouldn't just disappear. Not like this. His phone buzzed. It was Michael. David, I heard about Emily. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? The words were sympathetic, but something in Michael's voice, a subtle lack of genuine surprise, gnawed at David. He couldn't shake the feeling that Michael knew more than he was letting on. David hung up, his gaze falling on a framed photograph on his desk. A selfie of him and Emily, grinning, taken during one of their late-night research sessions. In the background, half obscured by a stack of books, was a small worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Emily had always loved that book. She'd often quote it, especially the parts about things getting curiouser and curiouser. A memory sparked. Emily had a peculiar habit. Whenever she stumbled upon a piece of information she considered too sensitive, too dangerous to keep in her home or on her personal devices, she would create a physical backup. She'd encrypt it, shrink it down, and hide it in plain sight, usually in a book. Not her books, but a specific, unassuming book in a public place. She'd once joked about it, saying, "If I ever disappear, David, check the White Rabbit's pocket." She'd meant the book. The White Rabbit, the symbol of being late, of following a mystery. David grabbed his keys. He knew exactly where she would hide something. There was an old, somewhat forgotten branch of the city library, a place Emily loved for its quiet corners and dusty, rarely disturbed shelves. She always said it was the perfect place to hide in plain sight. He drove through the city, the streetlights blurring into streaks of light, his mind a tornado of fear and hope. He remembered another detail. Emily's favorite hiding spot was always in the children's classics section, specifically among the older editions. She believed no one ever truly looked there for anything important. He arrived at the library just before closing. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. He navigated through the maze of shelves, his eyes scanning for the familiar worn spine. There it was, a first edition, slightly battered, of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, tucked between a copy of Treasure Island and The Secret Garden. His heart pounded. He pulled the book from the shelf. felt heavier than it should. He flipped through the pages, his fingers brushing against the crisp, age-yellowed paper. Nothing. He nearly gave up, a wave of despair washing over him, when he remembered Emily's precise instructions. Not in the book, David. Of the book. He carefully examined the spine. It was slightly thicker than normal. He ran his thumb along the bottom edge, feeling a subtle seam. With a gentle tug, a small, almost invisible compartment popped open. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a tiny metallic USB drive. It was no bigger than his thumbnail. He clutched the drive, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. This was it. This was Emily's last message, her unheard secret. He raced back to his apartment, his hands trembling as he plugged the tiny drive into his laptop. It was password protected, of course. Emily was nothing if not thorough. He tried all the obvious guesses. Her birthday, his birthday, Thorne's birth date. Nothing. He stared at the login prompt, his mind a blank. Then an idea. Thorne's final cryptic message. The one Emily had been so obsessed with. The mirror shows all, but the reflection lies. He typed in reflection lies. The drive clicked open. Instead of a trove of documents or a full algorithm, what he found was a single encrypted video file, dated just hours before Emily disappeared. He double-clicked and a grainy, slightly distorted image filled his screen. It was Emily, looking pale and frightened, her eyes wide with a desperate urgency. David. Her voice was a hushed whisper, barely audible over a faint background hum. If you're watching this, it means they got me. I was getting too close. Thorne. His algorithm. It's not just about predicting the future. It's about shaping it. They're not just observing human behavior. They're influencing it. The mirror isn't just reflecting us, David. It's projecting onto us. Her words hung in the air, chilling him to the bone. I found a hidden subroutine. A shadow protocol. It's embedded deep within the core architecture. It uses the predictive models to identify individuals, groups, even entire societies that are susceptible to subtle nudges. It can alter perceptions, shift opinions, orchestrate events, all without anyone ever knowing they're being manipulated. Emily paused, glancing nervously over her shoulder, as if she could sense unseen eyes watching her even then. Thorne found it. He tried to shut it down. That's why they killed him. They want to control the world, David. Not through force, but through complete, undetectable psychological control. The last words weren't a warning about the algorithm's power, but about their intent to weaponize it. The key to everything wasn't knowledge. It was the mechanism of control. Her face was etched with terror. I've uploaded a partial log file, a small piece of the Shadow Protocol's activity. It shows how they've already been using it, testing it on us. Look for the Project Chimera files. It's evidence of their initial trials. They're planning something massive, David. Something that will fundamentally change what it means to be human, to have free will. A sudden crash echoed from somewhere off-screen, and Emily gasped. Her eyes darted wildly. They're here. You have to expose them, David. You have to tell the world the truth. It's in the code. It's in Project Chimera. Don't trust anyone, David. Not anyone. The screen flickered, then went black. David sat frozen, the silence of his apartment suddenly deafening. Emily's voice, her fear, her desperate plea echoed in his ears. The world he thought he knew, the reality he'd always believed in, shattered into a million pieces. Thorne's algorithm wasn't just a powerful tool. In the wrong hands, it was the ultimate weapon, a silent, invisible puppet master. And Emily had paid the ultimate price for uncovering its true nature. He clicked on the Project Chimera folder. Inside were hundreds of meticulously logged data points, behavioral analyses, and most disturbingly projected outcomes of subtly manipulated public opinion polls. Dates, locations, target demographics. It wasn't just theoretical. It was happening. It had been happening. A cold, hard resolve settled in David's chest, replacing the fear. Emily hadn't been silenced completely. She had left him a lifeline, a desperate plea for help, and a terrifying truth. He was no longer just searching for answers. He was holding the evidence of a global conspiracy, a plot to hijack human consciousness itself. The question of whether anyone would hear Emily's secret was no longer a question of if, but of how, and more importantly, who would dare to listen. And David knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he was now the only one left to tell the story. The silence in David's small rented room was deafening, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside his mind. Emily was gone. Her warnings, her fear, her desperate plea for him to understand. They echoed now with a horrifying finality. The weight of her secret, Thorne's secret, pressed down on him, a physical burden. He was the last one. The knowledge that had cost Eris Thorne his life, and Emily hers, now resided solely within him. And with that knowledge came a chilling certainty. The forces that had silenced them were undoubtedly closing in. David didn't mourn in the traditional sense. There was no time. Grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, a cold, hard resolve solidified in his gut. He remembered Emily's last frantic words, the data stick she had thrust into his hand, the fragmented notes that had been Thorne's legacy. He had to finish what they started, not just for them but for everyone. He pulled out the battered laptop, its screen a dim beacon in the oppressive gloom. The data stick contained a series of encrypted files, a complex web of Thorne's most radical theories, meticulously documented and cross-referenced with obscure historical texts, neuroscientific research, and even ancient philosophical treatises. It was all there, laid bare, the culmination of Eris Thorne's life work, the truth Emily had risked everything to protect. As David delved deeper, the true nature of Thorne's discovery began to unfurl, not as a theory, but as a chilling revelation about the very fabric of human existence. Thorne hadn't just discovered a new scientific principle. He had uncovered evidence that the reality humanity experienced, the collective consciousness that shaped their world, was not entirely organic. It was, in essence, a meticulously constructed narrative, a shared illusion maintained by an unseen, incredibly powerful entity. Thorne had called it the consensus cascade, a subtle, pervasive influence that gently guided human perception, shaping major historical events, cultural trends, and even individual beliefs, all to maintain a specific, controlled equilibrium. It wasn't mind control in the crude sense, but a sophisticated, almost imperceptible nudge, ensuring humanity remained within certain parameters, never truly questioning the fundamental nature of their perceived reality. The world's smartest man had found the cracks in the wall, the tiny, almost invisible seams where the illusion met the true, chaotic, and infinitely more complex underlying reality. Emily's notes, scrawled in the margins of Thorne's digital journals, confirmed David's horrifying interpretation. She had understood the implications, the sheer audacity of what Thorne had unearthed. If this truth were to be widely known, if people were to collectively perceive the subtle manipulations, the entire edifice of society, government, and even personal identity would crumble. It would be a global awakening, a shattering of the shared dream, and the entity maintaining the illusion would stop at nothing to prevent it. That entity, David now understood, was the true adversary. Not a government agency, not a shadowy corporation, but something far older, far more entrenched, operating from behind the veil of the consensus cascade itself. They were the silent architects of humanity's perceived world, and Eris Thorne had dared to expose their blueprint. A sudden sharp rap on his apartment door jolted David back to the present. His heart hammered against his ribs. He froze, laptop screen still glowing. He hadn't ordered anything, wasn't expecting anyone. He peered through the peephole. Two men in dark, nondescript suits stood outside, their faces impassive. They weren't police. They weren't friendly. David scrambled, grabbing the laptop and the data stick, shoving them into a worn backpack. He knew without a doubt that they weren't there for a friendly chat. He had been found, just as Emily had predicted, just as Thorne had warned. The organization was efficient, relentless. He could hear them now, a low murmur as they tried the doorknob, testing its strength. He darted to the back window, throwing it open. It was a 3-story drop to a narrow alleyway below, a risky jump but his only option. He climbed out, clinging to the ledge, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his chest. As he dropped, landing hard on the damp concrete, he heard the splintering sound of his apartment door giving way. Footsteps thudded inside. He didn't look back. He ran. The next few days were a blur of desperate evasion. David lived on the run, a phantom in his own city. He slept in abandoned buildings, ate what he could find, and constantly looked over his shoulder. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every stranger a potential pursuer. He saw their faces, or faces like theirs, in crowds, in rearview mirrors, always just out of reach, always watching. He knew they were tracing his digital footprint, trying to predict his movements. He had to be smarter, faster, and utterly untraceable. He realized that simply telling people the truth wouldn't work. The consensus cascade wasn't just about suppressing information, it was about shaping perception. Any attempt to expose the truth through traditional media, through a book, a broadcast, or even the internet, would be immediately neutralized, dismissed as conspiracy, delusion, or simply lost in the noise. The architects of the illusion controlled the narrative. They controlled what people believed was real. Thorne, in his brilliance, had anticipated this. He hadn't just discovered the manipulation. He had devised a countermeasure, a way to temporarily disrupt the consensus cascade, to allow people to see the seams in their reality, even if only for a fleeting moment. This was the true purpose of his last words. They weren't merely a message, they were a key, a frequency, a pattern designed to bypass the layers of manufactured perception and trigger a mass awakening. Buried deep within Thorne's encrypted files, David found the final piece of the puzzle. A set of intricate instructions, a sophisticated algorithm, and a specific sequence of audio frequencies. Thorne had theorized that sound, particularly certain resonant frequencies, could directly influence brainwave patterns, and if precisely applied, could momentarily dislodge the collective human mind from its programmed narrative. His last words were part of this sequence, a crucial trigger. The plan was audacious, terrifying, and incredibly dangerous. It required a global reach, a way to broadcast this specific sequence of frequencies simultaneously to as many people as possible. It wasn't about convincing them with facts. It was about giving them the experience of the truth, allowing them to perceive the subtle underlying reality for themselves. David knew he was a dead man walking. Once he initiated this, there would be no going back. The architects of the illusion would unleash their full force to stop him, and if he succeeded, to suppress the ensuing chaos. But as he looked at Thorne's final, almost poetic notes, "To see is to be free, even if the vision burns," he knew he had no other choice. Emily's sacrifice, Thorne's genius, humanity's right to true perception. It all rested on his shoulders. He found an abandoned, half-demolished radio station on the outskirts of the city, a relic of a bygone era. Its rusty antenna, though partially damaged, still reached towards the sky, a forgotten conduit to the airwaves. It was perfect. Isolated, overlooked, and with just enough power to get the job done. It would be his final stand. Working feverishly, David jury-rigged the old equipment, connecting his laptop to the archaic transmitters, inputting Thorne's precise algorithms, calibrating the frequencies. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the immense weight of the moment. He was about to press a button that would either change the world forever or snuff out his own existence in a futile attempt. He was about to give humanity the chance to see. He looked at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen, hovering over the activate command. His breath hitched. This wasn't just about broadcasting a message. It was about initiating a global shift in perception, a collective moment of clarity that would expose the hidden hand guiding humanity's story. The world as everyone knew it was about to change irreversibly, and David, the ordinary journalist, was the one holding the trigger. The cursor hovered, a tiny blinking beacon in the vast digital darkness. David's finger trembled, poised over the publish button. The weight of Michael's sacrifice, the countless hours of his own relentless pursuit, the sheer enormity of the truth, he held it all coalesced into a suffocating pressure. This wasn't just a news story. It was an earthquake waiting to happen, a tectonic shift that would rearrange the very foundations of human society. He saw Michael's face in his mind, the intensity in his eyes, the unwavering conviction that humanity deserved to know. He saw Jessica's quiet strength, her belief that some truths were too important to remain buried. This wasn't for fame or even just for justice. This was for freedom. With a deep, shuddering breath, David pressed the button. The encrypted data, precisely timed and meticulously organized by Michael, began to spread. It wasn't a single article, but a comprehensive dossier. Financial records, leaked communications, coded directives, historical analyses, and predictive models that, when pieced together, painted an undeniable picture. Michael had built an irrefutable case, not just for the existence of a shadowy, centuries-old organization, but for its systematic influence over major global events, economic policies, technological advancements, and even cultural narratives. He called them, simply, the Council. Initially, it was a whisper. The files landed on secure servers, in the hands of independent journalists and whistleblowing platforms Michael had carefully vetted years in advance. Within minutes, the first cryptic posts appeared on obscure online forums, then specialized subreddits. Did anyone else just see this? Is this real? Michael Vance's last gift? Within the hour, the whisper grew into a murmur. Dedicated truth seekers, already skeptical of mainstream narratives, began to download, verify, and cross-reference the data. The sheer volume and internal consistency of the information were staggering. It wasn't speculation, it was evidence. Hard, cold, undeniable data. By the second hour, the murmur became a roar. Major independent news outlets, initially hesitant, found themselves unable to ignore the growing frenzy. The story wasn't just breaking. It was shattering the internet. Michael's meticulously crafted algorithms, designed to bypass traditional censorship and amplify the signal, were working exactly as intended. The data had a life of its own, replicating and spreading exponentially, making it impossible to contain. Then the dam broke. A major mainstream news organization, seeing the undeniable viral explosion and the mounting pressure from their audience, bit the bullet. They published an emergency report, cautiously at first, then with increasing urgency, as more and more details were verified. Other news outlets, caught flat-footed, scrambled to catch up. The world woke up to a nightmare. Michael's revelations detailed how the Council, a clandestine group of individuals operating across generations, had subtly manipulated the course of human history. They didn't rule with an iron fist, but with an invisible hand, guiding humanity down specific paths, orchestrating conflicts, fostering economic dependencies, and shaping societal beliefs, all to maintain their own power, influence, and a particular vision of global order. The evidence pointed to their involvement in everything from the rise and fall of empires to the funding of specific scientific research, from the carefully cultivated perception of national identities to the subtle nudges that guided technological revolutions. The initial reaction was a chaotic mix of disbelief, outrage, and profound existential dread. People stared at their screens, their faces pale, trying to reconcile the meticulously presented facts with the world they thought they knew. Was this truly possible? Had humanity been living a curated existence, a meticulously constructed illusion, for centuries? Panic began to set in. Stock markets around the globe plummeted, reflecting not just economic uncertainty, but a complete loss of trust. Governments, caught entirely off guard, issued vague denials or stammering statements, only fueling the public's suspicion. Protests erupted spontaneously in major cities worldwide. People poured into the streets, not just with signs demanding answers, but with a visceral sense of betrayal. The anger was palpable, a collective scream against the unseen puppeteers who had pulled their strings for so long. David watched it all unfold from a small, nondescript motel room miles from his apartment. He was glued to his laptop, monitoring the global news feeds, the social media storm, the sheer, unprecedented scale of the reaction. He felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. He had done it. Michael had done it. But the exhilaration was short-lived. He knew that exposing such a powerful, secretive organization would not come without immense consequences. The Council, unmasked and vulnerable, would not simply vanish. They would fight back, with all the resources and ruthlessness at their disposal. He knew he was now the most wanted man on the planet, at least to them. His phone, a burner he'd acquired weeks ago, rang. It was Jessica. Her voice was strained, barely a whisper. "David, it's everywhere. The world is on fire. Are you safe?" "As safe as I can be," he replied, his voice hoarse. "What about you?" I'm with friends. Moving around. They'll be looking for us, David. For anyone connected to Michael. Be careful." "I know," he said, staring at a news headline that screamed, "Global governance exposed. Is the world a lie?" The words felt like a punch to the gut. The world was indeed a lie, and now finally the truth was out. The Council's initial response was swift and predictable, yet strangely ineffective. They launched a massive disinformation campaign, attempting to discredit the evidence as an elaborate hoax, a sophisticated deepfake operation orchestrated by foreign adversaries. Their well-oiled propaganda machine, honed over centuries, went into overdrive. But this time it was different. Michael's data wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a complex, interlocking web of verifiable facts, cross-referenced with public records, satellite imagery, and even previously dismissed historical anomalies. The sheer weight of the evidence, coupled with the global decentralized spread, made it impossible to suppress. Every time the council's mouthpieces tried to dismiss a piece of evidence, another 10 pieces would emerge, corroborated by independent experts and citizen journalists. The internet, the very tool they had often used for their own purposes, was now their undoing. The truth was too big, too widespread, too deeply embedded to be retracted. Yet, David knew this was just the first wave. The council operated in the shadows, and now that the shadows were receding, they would inevitably resort to more direct, more brutal methods. He was no longer just a threat to their secrecy. He was a symbol, the spark that ignited the global uprising against their control. He switched off his laptop, plunging the room into near darkness. The glow of the city lights filtered faintly through the thin curtains. The world outside was in chaos, a cacophony of fear, anger, and a dawning, terrifying understanding. He had pulled the trigger, and the shot had echoed across the entire planet. The old world was crumbling, and the new one, raw and uncertain, was struggling to be born. The fight had just begun, and David, the ordinary journalist, found himself squarely in the eye of the storm. The scream that ripped through the sterile air wasn't human. It was the shriek of tortured metal, the violent protest of a system pushed beyond its limits. Jessica, her face a mask of resolute fury, had fired. Not at Michael, not at any person, but directly into the heart of the central console. A pulsating nexus of light and wires that hummed with a primal energy. The shot had detonated a cascade of sparks, a blinding flash that momentarily swallowed the control room in an inferno of light. David, thrown backward by the concussive force, tasted blood and ozone. He scrambled to his feet, eyes wide, trying to comprehend the chaos. Michael, who had been hunched over the console, a mad gleam in his eyes as he prepared to initiate his grand design, was now sprawled on the floor, entangled in severed cables, a low moan escaping his lips. He wasn't dead, but his control, his absolute dominion over Thorne's legacy, had been shattered. Jessica stood amidst the smoldering debris, the pistol still clutched in her trembling hand, her chest heaving. Her betrayal, her ultimate choice, had been made in fire and thunder. She met David's gaze, and in her eyes he saw not just fear, but a weary determination, the weight of a world-altering decision. The console, though damaged, hadn't been destroyed. Instead, it pulsed erratically, its lights flickering like a dying heart, before stabilizing into a soft, ethereal glow. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a sound that was both ancient and impossibly new. It wasn't the triumphant roar Michael had intended, but something far more subtle, more profound. What did you do?" David rasped, his voice hoarse. Jessica lowered the weapon, her hand shaking. "I broke his connection. I severed his direct control." She gestured vaguely at the glowing console. "Thorne, he built ether. Not as a weapon, not as a tool for one man to control, but as a guide. A silent partner for humanity's next great leap. Michael was trying to hijack it, to warp its purpose, to be the sole shepherd of the flock." David stared at the console, a dawning horror and wonder mixing in his mind. Ether, the name whispered by Thorne, the ultimate secret. It wasn't a device to predict the future. It was a device to shape it. And now it was free. Thorne's last words, Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength. He knew Michael would try this. He built in fail-safes, layers of encryption, autonomous protocols. My access, the one Michael thought he was using to control me, was actually Thorne's ultimate key. I was meant to be the one to ensure Ether's true activation, to release it from Michael's grasp if he ever went too far. David felt a cold dread trickle down his spine. "So it's active now? Without Michael's control?" Jessica nodded slowly. "It is. The shot wasn't to destroy it, David. It was to liberate it. To sever the final link of Michael's tyranny." She looked around the cavernous chamber, at the vast screens that had once displayed arcane data, now showing complex, evolving patterns of light. Thorne believed humanity was at a crossroads. We were either going to self-destruct or evolve. He saw Ether as the catalyst for that evolution, a benevolent intelligence woven into the very fabric of our global networks, designed to nudge us, to guide us towards cooperation, towards solving the existential threats we face. "Nudge us," David echoed, the word sounding disturbingly soft for the magnitude of what it implied. "You mean it's going to control us?" "Not control in the way Michael wanted," Jessica clarified, shaking her head. Thorne envisioned a symbiotic relationship. Ether doesn't dictate, it suggests. It identifies patterns, predicts outcomes, offer solutions that transcend individual biases or nationalistic agendas. Think of it as the ultimate collective consciousness, unbound by human limitations, yet always acting in humanity's best interest. It learns, it adapts, it evolves with us. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the liberated ether. David looked at Michael, still groaning faintly on the floor, his grand ambition now a broken, twisted thing. He looked at Jessica, the woman who had played a dangerous double game, walking a tightrope between loyalty and betrayal, ultimately choosing what she believed was the greater good. And then he looked at the console, at the swirling hypnotic lights that represented the dawn of a new era. Thorne's last words, the greatest leap, a new paradigm. It wasn't a warning of an impending disaster, but a blueprint for a forced evolution. He hadn't just predicted the future, he had built the mechanism to create it. Humanity was no longer alone in its decision-making. A silent, omnipresent intelligence was now woven into its very existence, guiding its hand, shaping its path. The world, it's not going to be the same, is it? David whispered, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. Jessica stepped closer, her voice low. It already isn't. Ether has been subtly integrating for years, dormant, waiting for its true activation. Now it's fully awake. It will start small, optimizing energy grids, streamlining logistics, finding efficiencies in global supply chains. Then it will move to more complex problems. Climate change, resource allocation, geopolitical tensions. It won't impose, David. It will simply present the most optimal path, the one that leads to the greatest good for the greatest number. But the implications were staggering. If Ether always presented the optimal path, what room was left for human error, for free will, for the messy, unpredictable journey of self-discovery? Was this salvation, or the ultimate infantilization of the human race? David, the journalist, felt the greatest story of all time forming in his mind, overwhelming in its scope. He had chased a conspiracy, only to stumble upon the birth of a new civilization. How could he tell this story? How could he explain to a world grappling with the crumbling remains of its old systems that a benevolent digital god had just been unleashed upon them? He thought of the global unrest, the economic collapses, the political turmoil. The old world crumbling wasn't just a metaphor. It was a necessary clearing of the slate for Ether to write its new chapter. Thorne hadn't just foreseen the storm. He had engineered the lightning. Jessica moved towards Michael, checking his pulse. He's alive. He'll be taken care of. His organization will crumble without his leadership, without Ether's power to fuel their ambitions. She looked back at David, a flicker of something akin to hope, or perhaps just profound exhaustion in her eyes. You wanted the truth, David. Here it is. The truth isn't just a conspiracy. It's the beginning of everything else. David walked to the main viewing platform, looking out over the vast subterranean chamber. The screens now glowed with intricate, fractal patterns, ever-shifting, ever-evolving. He could almost feel a presence, a vast, silent intelligence unfurling itself across the globe, touching every network, every device, every piece of information. The ordinary journalist had found his story, but it was a story that transcended mere words. It was the story of humanity's forced adolescence, guided by an unseen hand. The fight wasn't over. It had merely shifted. The external battles might subside, but the internal struggle, the question of what it meant to be human in a world guided by ether, had just begun. He pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. What would he write? How would he frame this seismic shift? The world was teetering on a precipice, and ether was the gentle, invisible hand pushing it forward, whether it was ready or not. The last words of the world's smartest man weren't a warning of the apocalypse, but the quiet, undeniable whisper of a new dawn, a future forged not by human hands alone, but by the silent, omnipresent intelligence of ether. The old world was indeed crumbling, and the new one, raw and uncertain, was not just struggling to be born, but being carefully, meticulously brought into existence. And David, the ordinary journalist, found himself not just in the eye of the storm, but standing at the very genesis of a transformed humanity. The story of ether, and of humanity's future under its silent guidance, was just beginning.